everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Stone Genius Podcast. My name's Dro. I'm the Stone Genius. You know me. I'm often stoned. I'm always the genius. I'm super excited about today's guest. We're going to be talking about a subject matter that I talk about all the time. In fact, my thumbnail is an alien. Oh, shoot. I already spoiled what we're going to talk about a little. Anyway, this gentleman is an author. We're going to talk about one of his latest books. We're going to talk about one of his previous books as well. Welcome to the show, Martin Keller. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
I'm so excited to have you here. And your latest book, I want to get to, and people will hang around because it's a great topic. But the name of that book is The Space Pen Club. And I'm going to describe what I read about it, and then we're going to circle back around because I want to go to your first book, if that's all right. But that is described as a multi-layered memoir of an experiencer. Does that sound pretty correct?
I think that's pretty close.
Okay. So, and I do want to talk about that, but I know that you wrote another book, and it was called Hijinx Hearsay, Scenester Stories from Minnesota's Pop Life. So, can you tell me, and I don't know a ton about that particular book, but as we were talking before I hit the record button, I just had these vague memories of being around Minneapolis in the early 90s at Prince's Club. And so I wanted to know what that book, how you were associated and what led you to write that book.
Well, I covered popular culture here in the Twin Cities from the late 70s to the early 90s.
So what would pop culture, what all did that include now? Because I'm sure it's, and I don't even think I would have a definition if someone asked me right now. I could probably throw something. But what were you considering? What were you covering as pop culture at that time?
You know, I covered everything from the music scene here, which included the folk clubs, the blues and R&B bands, the funk bands, the new wave bands like the Replacements and Husker Du. I also covered the comedy scene, the blues scene here. I mean, Minneapolis is probably one of the best places to hear live music with a rich tradition of many hit makers, if you will, coming out of here, going back to the 60s. And I happen to be covering all of this territory, plus the comedy scene. The comedy scene kind of blew up in parallel with all the new wave bands and the rise of Prince and his Paisley Park Kingdom and bands that he produced.
Right.
Comedy scene kind of in parallel broke open here and produced these tremendous comics like the late Louis Anderson and Liz Winstead, who co-founded The Daily Show. A number of other lesser comics who moved out to Hollywood and ended up writing and producing behind the scenes. So I had a pretty good ride, and then I got tired of it.
So you got to see many of these people before they became big names or household names. Like, you were probably talking about these people, and people were saying, "Who? What are you talking about?" So did you get to see these people when they were unknowns for the most part? Many times?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, I was probably one of three journalists, in town here who interviewed Prince when he was 17. And my first encounter with Prince, I had many. I interviewed Prince about 4 or 5 times and hung out at things like his birthday party and after hours surprise gigs at First Avenue, which is the big landmark club here in downtown Minneapolis.
Is that? I mean, so here's my whole basis of hanging out with Prince. It was a Dave Chappelle sketch. That's how I pay there on his old show. He does a sketch where he's Prince, and then I think it was Charlie Murphy hangs out, and it's a story about hanging out with Prince, and so that's my whole basis on what it was like to hang out with him, but you actually interviewed him. What was it like to see him as a 17-year-old, and then whatever one of the later times that you could you see that the growth, or did you know as a 17-year-old that obviously you were interviewing him at 17, but did you know what a star he was going to become?
I always felt he was going to be a superstar, even at that young age. But I'll tell you, interviewing him when he was 17, when his first album came out on Warner Brothers, was excruciatingly painful. He was really, really shy, totally inside. He sat on the interview took place over at his drummer's apartment, which is in the Uptown area. Famous song on the Dirty Mind album, Uptown. Prince sat on the floor in the kitchen, and I figured, well, I better get at his level, although I'm not sure anybody was ever at Prince's level. So conducted the interview. I'm leaning against the refrigerator. He's leaning against the stove, and I got so few really solid, juicy, fleshy quotes out of him that I thought, man, I don't know if I'm going to have enough for a story here. But, he slowly opened up, and fast forward to when Prince had established his Paisley Park recording studio way out in the suburbs. He was hosting a international press conference for his 3-album record release of the album called Emancipation. This is after his big Warner Brothers fight, where he's changed his name to a symbol, wrote "slave" across his face, and a very public spat with his original label. And I tell you, the Prince at 17 versus the Prince out at Paisley Park, literally reigning over the international collection of journalists there, it was night and day, to use a cliche. He didn't need to do any press at that point. He was a global superstar, and but he was, at this point, very charming. He knew how to work a room. He knew what journalists wanted, and he delivered.
And I think some people don't understand, because so few people have it, that when they there's something about them being in a room. It's just a different energy. And sometimes people aren't around people that they may think they are, but like when you're really around a true superstar, whether it's athletically based, whether it's creatively based, musically based, it's just something different. And I think you can feel it, but it's interesting because I've always wondered whether that was something they had. Some of these, Michael Jackson started performing when he was a wee little kid. So I didn't know when but it seemed like he learned that sometime from the time that you first saw him at 17 to that sometime down the road. And that's interesting that you're able to, because I've always wondered how learnable of trait that would be because people are like, oh, you just have to exude confidence. And it's like, sometimes confidence begets confidence. You have to be confident to be confident. So, which may not make any sense, but I mean, that's interesting that you said you noticed such a change in him. What?
Well,
I'm sorry.
From the beginning, I always admired and recognized Prince's acute musical abilities. I mean, he could play just about anything he picked up or touched.
Was that due to hard work or God-given talent?
I think it's both. Okay. I mean, he was a relentless workaholic. He worked his bands into the flooring out at Paisley Park. They would rehearse endless hours. He was a lot like James Brown. I think he learned quite a bit from James Brown, not just dance steps, but discipline and having your band be disciplined. And, he was smart enough to surround himself with good choreographers. He had his own costume shop out at Paisley Park. So, I mean, he had the whole enterprise going on, and it was pretty remarkable to watch. And of course, I don't have to talk about how great the music was even at different periods in his career.
Right. And that's one thing I don't know. I mean, I don't know where I would pick if I was listening to music. He would definitely be in my top 10 of a go-to if I just needed a pick-me-up. A lot of times before programs, I have nervous energy before I talk to someone new, and I'll get that out by just dancing around, and he would definitely be in that rotation. But it's great hearing a story like that, because now that I've had that flashback to Prince's, that I was at Prince's club for some reason, I'm gonna have to figure that out. So, interesting. So, the Hijinx and Hearsay? What is one of the stories that sticks out the most that you'd like to share from that book? What's something that really stuck out as you at that time covering pop culture? Because, like you said, I forgot about this too. The 80s and 90s was huge for comedy. I remember here in Kansas City, those comedy clubs back then were totally different than they are now. Back then, they were fancy, like high-end bars that would, function as a comedy club as well. And now, I pretty sure I went to a comedy club that used to be a closet for the restaurant next door.
Yeah.
It was so small.
Well, that was the case for many of the early comedy clubs here in the late 70s, early 90s. I guess in terms of what stood out, what else stood out in the Hijinx and Hearsay book, certainly my interview with Bob Dylan. I had quite a bit of quality time with Mr. Zimmerman. I interviewed him for over 3 hours when Infidels came out in '83. I got to go on the Never Ending Tour in 1990 for a week through the Midwest. I saw Bob socially, so I had a kind of trust with him that ended up benefiting me by getting a really long interview with him after a highly controversial period in his artistic journey, right after his so-called Christian conversion and the 3 or 4 albums he made in that period prior to Infidels. I think the other things, there's some funny stories about Paul McCartney scolding me at a large press conference in Iowa because I asked a second question. And then I had some real quality time with Bob Marley, too. Smoked the sacred herb with Brother Bob. Almost right out of the bat, the interview in his hotel suite, he whips out a spleef the size of a banana. And, the interview went in about 20 different directions, and that was interesting. But he was very charismatic. I mean, these people do have that, what everyone calls the it factor, and you see it immediately. And with McCartney, it's more his charming sense of humor, which I think he also wields as a shield against, fans. He doesn't really want to engage you at any level, but I mean, he was very good working the press. There's a story in there about traveling with Bonnie Raitt through the Rockies. That was a memorable occasion, and also interviewing U2 on their first American tour, where
so would that have been early 80s, around 80s? Because I remember when I first found U2, at least here in Kansas City, so this would have been around 80-ish, I think, maybe late 70s. But the only place we could find U2 was at Christian bookstores. That was the only place that had records. That was the only place at the time that we seemed to be able to find U2. And I don't know what album changed that for them, but am I recalling that right? Because I recall a lot of things incorrectly, quite honestly.
Well, I think you're right on the time frame. Late 70s, early 1980.
And were they known originally as a Christian band, kind of?
No, not at all.
Oh, they weren't. Okay. For some reason, I felt like that's where you had to find them here in Kansas City. But there are a lot of weird stuff that goes on here in Kansas City. So
the funny thing about interviewing these guys, and of course Bono did all the talking. They were, they were barely 17 themselves. They're very short. They all fit on a queen size bed. They all sat on the bed together, and I think I write in the book that it was like seeing hobbits who had wandered too far from the Shire. It was their first tour. They were very young and naive. They didn't have a big repertoire of stuff to play, so they repeated a lot of the stuff during their set, which kind of pissed off quite a few folks. The show was at First Avenue. After the interview, I did go down with my photographer, Greg Helgeson, and whose photos, Greg's got 150 great black and white photos in this book. And we both accompanied them to First Avenue for the sound check, but the sound check seemed to go on forever. I mean, it was, 2 to 3 hours long.
For a sound check?
Yeah, but I didn't realize it at the time, is that they were writing their next album, October, on that stage. And that's been verified a couple of different times. They were actually writing songs for that record because number one, they had the time to do it, and number two, I think, they were starting to think about their next album. So those are just some of the highlights from that book.
So are there a lot of photos included in that book as well?
Yeah, there's 150 photos.
So were you the photographer on that, or did you have a photographer that went with you?
Greg, as I mentioned, it was Greg Helgeson.
Greg Helgeson was the, okay. So because then you have it, document, because a lot of the stuff, I dated a young woman that had worked for Capitol Records, or I think she was in college here locally, but she did something with Capitol Records, and so the only two that I remember going to hang out with her was Everclear and Lawrence, when they played a little a band. They were playing little college bars. And so I'm trying to think, that would have been early 90s. And about the same time, it was, we hung out with the Beastie Boys of the Velvet Dog here in town. And I didn't go to the concert, but I went to that, and they gave me shit about that. But I was like, I'm a fan, but not a big enough fan to go to your concert. And it was funny that, so it's cool that because I can tell those stories, and a lot of times because I don't embellish stories, but I do. I have a big personality, so I generally have big stories. So a lot of times people will call bullshit until they're verified. But so that's neat that you have not only these stories, but you have the photo in the book. I get that, but I mean, and the memories. That is so amazing.
Yeah, they describe the stories more as little backstage-like anecdotes. They're quick read. There's about 43 stories and 150 photos in the book, but some very big names.
In your time covering pop culture, who surprised you the most? Whether it be negatively, positively, it doesn't, and you don't have to tell us, but was there one person that just really, like, I thought they were just going to be different, no matter what that was?
That's a tough question to answer. I've been a huge Bob Dylan fan my whole life. In fact, I still dream about Bob Dylan. I don't know what that's about. I mean, I interviewed him a long time ago. That was always kind of a goal of mine. But even after that, I continued to have sporadic Dylan dreams, if you will. Bob was very down to earth and very funny. And I think a lot of people overlook his sense of humor in his work because he deals with such weighty topics, the least of which is probably the entanglements of romances and love affairs, etc. But, he was surprisingly accessible and enjoyable to be around, and he looked great. I never saw Bob Dylan when he didn't look really good.
So, I mean, and that's neat to hear, because I'm 56 now. So I was thinking, you had mentioned that he had an album, I think you had mentioned 1983, when it was kind of changing the tone again for him. And I wonder if that's because in 83, that would have been my sophomore year in high school. So I'm just wondering if leading up to that, the few years leading up to that, whether was he absent on the radio or what? Because it sounded like you had mentioned that something before that album in 83 was different about him.
Well, he had a very striking religious conversion from Judaism to Christianity, and he was not on the radio in that period. That's a 3 or 4 year period. Bob's never been never had a big presence on radio.
I was just trying to think of why I wasn't more exposed to Bob Dylan when I was growing, because I was exposed to many different types of music genres, individuals, artists, and so it seems weird that I was never. Like, if someone asked me to name a Bob Dylan song, I could name 0 songs. Literally 0 titles come to mind.
You better work on that.
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah. Sometimes I wonder if I have a finite memory, so I'm worried that I may, memorize that, and then it's going to push out, the Heimlich maneuver, so then someone's going to be choking. I'll be like, yeah, I don't know what to do, but I can tell you this new Bob Dylan song I just learned the name to. So, okay, so we're going to do a quick gear change here, I believe, to your most current book, which is the Space Pen Club. Can you explain a little bit about, first, the title and the background about the title, and then about the book, a little bit about the book itself?
Well, the book is, I'm going to reverse my answer to your 2 questions. The book is a personal, historical, and cultural memoir about my lifelong, some people call an obsession, experiences, and research into the whole world of ufology, now being called UAP, Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon. The title stems from an actual unofficial fraternity-like group of men and women at my college, which is about 80 miles west of here in Collegeville, Minnesota, St. John's University. It's out in the woods. We're kind of isolated. And one of my college pals who worked at the bookstore found a space pen, a Fisher space pen for sale in the bookstore. He brought one home to his dorm and shared it with the guys. And for a while, it kind of became a joke, like, hey, this is the first pen to write in space, which is true. The Fisher Space Company, which is located in Nevada, continues to pump out different models of space pens every year. It's a fascinating company, I think, and the origin of the actual Fisher space pen.
Well, it's interesting because there's probably a certain age of listeners that I have that have no idea what a space pen is because they're so used to texting. They're probably asking what a pen is. Forget the space part. What do you mean pen? I feel like that's where we're going in this society. That's a side note. But I remember in the 70s, the space pen, and for some reason, it's a conversation I remember having with my dad, and he just said, well, you can write when you need to lean against a wall. And I was like, why would I ever need to write while leaning? And I remember this conversation, and he's like, and I just remember him getting frustrated, and I think he used the term, it's anti-gravity.
Yeah, it writes in outer space where there is no gravity.
Yeah, and so
also writes underwater and across greasy surfaces. So it's kind of a multi-purpose pen that has all of these singular qualities.
And so your space club that you had there, was it just there at your one college? This wasn't like a nationwide thing that spread out the space pen club?
It was central to that college campus, and eventually we did form a an unofficial club around it, and we would hold different party events out in the woods at an abandoned chapel. I went to a Catholic university, and it became a thing with us. And there's a core group of Space Pen members that are very tightly knit, close friends. They do stuff like hiking and fly fishing trips and stuff like that. They meet on Zoom once a week. But when my book came out, I started a Space Pen Club group page on which you can join if you ask. There's a lot of good discussion about the UFO topic there. People share different memes and other things. The club was, I write in the book that the Space Pen represented self-exploration, cosmic consciousness, and communications, transcendence, and the occasional quest for beer, girls, tunage, and controlled substances. I mean, this is the mid '70s. There's a lot of mind-expanding drug experimentation going on. You can do the math.
Right.
In fact, that's kind of the subhead of the Space Pen Club book, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, which we can talk about in a second. UFO disclosure, consciousness, and other mind zoomers. That's the subhead, the very long subhead of my book. But it was a great group of people that participated in these parties. We had an annual Peek with the Leaves party in the woods. People would dress up in costumes, which now I guess everyone calls cosplay. And then we would have a spring rites event also out at the woods, and same scenario. So, but the guy who found the pen in the bookstore was kind of thinking aloud about it, and he came up with the notion that the Space Pen ultimately represented possibilities. And I think that's exactly what the UFO discussion, when you cut back to the real, nut of the matter and get rid of all the junk and the noise that has surrounded the subject for 75 years, a true disclosure presents enormous possibilities. And I think Dan Aykroyd, who generously gave me an big endorsement for the book, really, hang on one second, I have to grab the book.
Yeah.
Aykroyd really, I think, captured the essence of the possibilities of this whole UFO thing. If we did have a true disclosure, he writes, if I can pull it up. The Space Pen Club is an essential read for anyone interested in getting to the truth about one of the greatest mysteries and enigmas in our existence. Who owns these hyper-advanced off-world aerodynamic platforms? Who controls their obviously intelligent, non-human operation? And if these things are known to anyone, why can't the technology be shared now?
Right.
The mechanisms and fuel sources in these crafts could help save our planet and provide basic needs for millions: power, clean water, and climate temperance. Thank you, Danny Aykroyd. That's the possibilities that UFOs represent, and that's the connection to the possibilities that the actual Space Pen Club is engaged in, at least in the world in which I framed it in the book.
Right. So how long have you been interested in the subject, and what was your origin story? Were you just curious about it? And I'll give you mine real quick. And I've said this on the podcast before. I had a Jeep. I was going out with my cousin and his girlfriend at the time. We were going downtown. It was summertime, had the top off the Jeep. And we were driving down a 4-lane, two lanes either direction, street in a suburb of Kansas City. And not only did I stop, but everyone else, and there were quite a few cars out. I mean, it's probably 10-ish o'clock at night. And it looked like a very bright something just booking through the sky. It didn't look more than a very bright star, but it was booking through the sky. And then it stopped. And it hung out for a while, like maybe 10 seconds. And then it started doing all these erratic maneuvers. And then it went back the direction it came from. And I didn't give it another thought until the next night on the local weather. And I even remember the weatherman who just retired, who did this. He said, we got a lot of reports from the suburbs about a UFO or something in the sky. We checked, and it was a Russian satellite falling out of space. And I was like, that's not, and that's when I don't think I gave it a lot of thought until that point, and I immediately called bullshit. And then I had a much more open mind, and I have actually seen video from I think from the space station of what I saw, like in our atmosphere, something enter, do what I saw, and then leave. I have no idea the time frame of that video compared to mine. So what led you what led you into this path?
Well, a couple different things. Number one, I was a space nerd as a kid. I was totally taken with the early space exploration programs, the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo programs. Apollo, of course, put men on the moon.
Not have you asked some of my guests.
What's that?
I said, not have you asked some of my guests. We haven't put men on the moon.
Well, yeah, but
yeah,
I'm not here to talk about that. I was so interested in space, outer space, that I wrote to NASA and got information packets back along with autographed photos of the astronauts in all those programs, put my favorite guys up on the wall alongside my posters of the Stones, Beatles, and Dylan. That said, I had a sighting, pretty dramatic sighting with 3 other friends. And we grew up in a remote part of western North Dakota in a town called Dickinson. And there'd been UFO sightings in the western part of the state all week when we saw our UFO at halftime during a basketball game, high school basketball game. And we ran outside. I mean, this is February. It was literally like 20 below zero. We ran outside without our coats. We saw this oval, luminous object about a quarter of a mile away over a North Dakota State University Farm Extension Service buildings and land. And it just seemed to hover there. And one of the guys I was with said, "Hey, we should get in my car and run over there and get a closer look." And I think I was the idiot who poo-pooed that. Number one, we didn't have our coats on, and number two, the basketball game was really good. So I wish.
Yeah, I mean, extraterrestrials, a basketball game. I get it. I totally understand.
So I mean, that was kind of the start of it. I read the UFO rags that were available back then, and then once I went off to college, I pretty much forgot about this subject and then started my early professional career as a journalist. And then I forgot about it until some strange stuff started to happen in my house in the early 90s in South Minneapolis. And that's laid out pretty clearly in the first 2 chapters of my book. I want to ask. So
I want to ask about a quote that I've written down. And it was funny because I'd written down the quote, and then I wrote after it. I wrote "what" with a question. I wrote "what" with a question mark after it, and then I'm pretty sure I'd been smoking when I wrote this note down. So when I read the note, I go, I can't say this without knowing where it came from. So I did find it. It was on an Amazon. I think it was the Amazon description of your book, The Space Pen Club, and it says, And I've changed some of the pronouns in this to you or yours, but your adventures with the elites of ufology took you to many unusual and active high strangeless locations, including your own bedroom. And of course, that's where I stopped, and that's where I wrote, what? So could you at least fill me in on that part? Because it seems like there's some unpacking in that one statement I just read.
Yeah, there's a lot of unpacking there. There still is. I mean, I had my wife and I experienced some very strange things in that bedroom. They were abduction-like events. I don't know if they were full-fledged abductions. I have a hard time with that whole abduction scenario. In fact, one of the major themes in the book is sort of the quest to find out what exactly we had experienced back then. But it was very dramatic.
See, they don't really have a name for that, do they? Because I was kind of thinking, as you're saying this, my head's always churning, but as you're saying abduction, it's either abduction or it's not abduction. Like, with UFOs and they change it to UAPs because it's a phenomenon. They don't know exactly what it is, but they don't have that for, like what you say, abductions. You're not sure if it's a full-fledged abduction. So it's like they should almost have, and maybe they do, and I'm just not aware of it, something that it identifies that. Like a UAP is because we don't know what it is. We have no idea. Just like this, because you're saying that you're not fully sure that it was an abduction, and you have some issues with that. So is there any terminology, or does that make sense what I just said?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to characterize the so-called abduction experience as a close encounter of the fourth kind, and that was a term minted by Jacques Vallée, a Frenchman who's written 7 or 8 books now on the UFO issue. Every book is different. Every book posits a new idea about what these things might be. Close encounter of the fourth kind really is up close and personal interaction with the visitors, either on board a craft or in another terrestrial location.
So can I add, because I know what third kind is because of the movie. How many levels, how many kinds are they? And can you tell me and the audience what, and if you don't know, because I don't know either, that's fine. But I would just, do you know what those are, those multiple levels or the kinds of contact?
Yeah, I can run through those really quickly. I just gave a presentation in Fargo last weekend, and we actually discussed this very topic. Let me pull up the slides that have it. Close encounter of the first kind is visual sighting of a UFO seemingly less than 500 feet away that show an appreciable angular extension and considerable detail. Close encounter of the second kind, a UFO event in which a physical effect is alleged. This can be interference in the functioning of a vehicle or electronic device, animals reacting as physiological effects such as paralysis or heat and discomfort in the witness, or some physical trace like the impressions in the ground, scorched or otherwise affected vegetation, or a chemical trace. And of course, close encounters of the third kind, in which animated entities are present. These include humanoids, robots, and humans who seem to be occupants of a UFO. And this terminology was coined by Dr. Alan Hynek, who has a very interesting history. Hynek went from being a hardened skeptic involved in Project Blue Book, the big government, kind of a sham collection of evidence, if you will, the best cases were classified, of course, and the others were shared with the public.
And you can correct me if I'm wrong. He was an educator, was it at Ohio State? And they came and because it was almost like he was the Scully character from X-Files. Like at least in the research, not research, but stuff I've watched and read about him. And there was a show that kind of revolved around him as well, I think on the Sci-Fi Channel. But it seemed like he was almost brought in to debunk these and say that am I correct on that with Alan Hynek?
Yeah, that was Hynek. He went from being a hardened skeptic to I guess a firm believer, although I hate using that term believer because it conjures up a lot of religious connotations.
Right.
But Hynek came out and said at one point after he had finished debunking everything, that phase of his professional life, he came out and he said, there's an embarrassment of riches in terms of evidence. You don't have to look far. It's all there. It's in plain sight. So that's Hynek. And then along comes Dr. Stephen Greer in the early 90s, who I first encountered as a journalist, a freelance journalist, writing a story about Greer's organization called the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, or CSETI for short.
Right.
And Greer had the whole close encounters of the fifth kind. This is human-initiated contact with the visitors in real time. He trains groups to go out under the stars and try to initiate contact with whoever or whatever these objects are, using sound, lights, and remote viewing. And a third of my book is based on my time with Greer. I wrote I thought it was really good, 20-page story about him and his organization and his methods, which I pretty much thought was the next viable arm of research into this subject. It pretty much ignored the government. Greer went on to hold 3 public disclosure events in Washington. The last one was in June. I went to that. It was pretty informative. I wrote a blog about it on my book's website, the spacepenclub.com. And I was also at the first one that he did in Washington, where we had about 15 witnesses and Apollo astronaut Ed Mitchell, who I had recruited to CSETI. Ed was the 6th man to walk on the moon, so there's some good and occasionally funny stories about Dr. Mitchell in the book. But a good third of my book is about our adventures that Greer and other colleagues of ours in CSETI had, including trip to the volcano zone in Mexico, where UFOs are seen on a fairly regular basis. So I came at Greer's world as a journalist. I couldn't get the story sold. This topic's been so marginalized up until December 2017, when the New York Times had a front page story about a secret Pentagon study 10 years earlier. It's been so marginalized that nobody would, I don't think they even read the damn thing when I sent it out to magazines like The Atlantic and Vanity Fair. Today I could publish a story like that anywhere on the internet and maybe make $5, but
well, and that, it's funny because so the 70s were a different time with pornography. You actually had to buy, or in my case, because of age, get magazines, not for my dad because he didn't look at Playboy, but you had to get them from, and that's what you'd have to do. And the joke back then was like, oh, well, my dad, or you would hear someone say, my husband gets Playboy because of the articles. But I will tell you, I literally remember reading articles in Playboy about, that's where, like, if you wanted to read an article about UFOs or cattle mutilations, because they tried to tie those in quite often as well, and things of that nature, those were the type of magazines in the 70s Not that I was looking at every magazine. I was more focused, quite honestly, in my teens on those magazines, I guess. But it just seemed like that's where the journalism was. That's just like you say. No, a regular paper wasn't taking this. They weren't printing these stories.
Yeah, Playboy did some good work on the UFO front when nobody else would. I think I actually sent my story to Playboy, but I never got any rejection letter back, and it just kind of died on the vine. So at that point, I'd been working pretty extensively in public relations, and I said to Greer, I said, look, I can probably help you get more exposure for what you're doing for you and your organization if I become your publicist. And so I did. And I got him on Larry King. Larry King did a special from around the Area 51 location in Nevada. I got him on that. We did a bunch of other stuff. Unfortunately, we had a 48 hours news crew from CBS shadow us when we went to Mexico's volcano zone. Got a whole chapter on that. That's a pretty interesting chapter in the book. And they did 4 segments on UFOs, and ours was one of them, but they made us look like idiots. I mean, it was really embarrassing, and they didn't provide any context. What are we doing in Mexico? Well, there was a UFO wave, or flap, as they call it, in Mexico in the early 90s over Mexico City and out in the rural country, where literally thousands of people were seeing these objects day and night. And there's quite a bit of footage from that on the internet. There's also a really compelling videotape called Messengers of Destiny. If you can find that, it used to be on a VHS format. I think it's probably been dumped onto DVD, or maybe it's on YouTube now. I haven't looked in a long time, but
what is your personal take on, like, the footage that the U.S. government is releasing now, like the Tic Tac video and other videos they're releasing? What is your take, especially as someone that probably is more intimately in tune with some of the known players, so you probably have access to information that I probably don't have, or just heard more volume of information that I don't have. What is your personal take on these UAPs?
Well, I know what Greer thinks. He thinks these Tic Tacs, which were widely reported and seen a million times on news programs about the subject, he says those are ours, and he can cite the patents for them. And
so why wouldn't we? I mean,
they're from classified deep black projects. Not a lot of people are going to be aware of their point of origin. This is a very compartmentalized area,
right?
In the military and intel, and private industry is involved.
So do you?
Look
You
at
said
the last blog about Washington, the Washington disclosure event that Greer and another gentleman, Professor Michaels, what's his last name? I'm blanking on his name.
So you said that this was Greer's opinion, or that they're ours and he can state patents, but you did explicitly say that was his. Do you agree with that?
After seeing these presentations in Washington, I do agree with it.
Okay.
This colleague of his that also presented on crash retrievals, Michael Schratt, I think he's a academic who specializes in military technology. Schratt's statistic was 90% of these things are ours, and the other 10% are from somewhere out in the galaxy. And he made a pretty good case for that. He also made a very convincing case for the fact that we've reverse engineered a lot of these down spacecraft, that we've had anti-gravity craft since as far back as the 50s, and you can imagine the advances made on those since then. But he also pointed out that if you see one that's man-made, if you see a man-made so-called UAP, you're going to see nuts and bolts, whereas and wires and stuff, whereas if you see the craft of origin, or the ones that these man-made ones are modeled on, they're pretty much seamless. They don't have any industrial-looking components to them, and they're highly sophisticated. Their operational capabilities are, I still think, beyond our grasp.
And do you think that they're here to monitor us, or what if they're from elsewhere outside of terrestrial origin? What do you think their purpose is here?
Well, that's a good question, and I don't have a better answer than anyone else, the man on the street or Dr. Greer or any of the people in ufology who studied this their whole lives. If you look at the record, once the atomic bomb was blown off, and if you haven't seen Oppenheimer, I encourage everybody to go see it. It's a wonderful film, wonderfully made film. The UFO sightings increased dramatically after that. The sightings around nuclear air bases, including one about 100 miles from my home in Minot, North Dakota, there's a whole recollection of the incident there, where an object shut down the base, basically, and scrambled the launch code on some ICBM missiles. So if you look at the historical record since the atomic bomb, these things have been seen pretty regularly over our nuclear plants. I personally think they're surveilling us. There's also a strong support for the idea that that now that we have these nuclear capabilities, we can not only destroy ourselves and the planet, but the effects of atomic energy bleed into space, and they also corrupt the filament of space, if you will. So it's not only a threat to Earth, but it's a threat to the visitors and perhaps their home planets if this stuff seeps out into the universe in any fashion. That's a school of thought I tend to embrace.
So you had mentioned that the UAPs that are here are unmanned, or whatever. They're automated.
Well, they might be.
Oh, they might be. So do you believe? So here's one of my takes that I had recently, and of course I was super high, and I was watching a YouTube show that I like very much called The Y Files, and they were doing something, and it had to do with lizard people and being here on Earth. And so I started thinking about this, and then I started thinking about UAPs, because my thought was, if there are lizard people here on Earth, and they look like lizards, but they've taken the time to cover themselves with human skin, they're not going to fly something that goes 80,000 miles an hour. They could be in a Cessna plane and just take their time and look at everything they wanted to and just blend. Because to me, I try to reconcile everything. I'm going to ask you another question here in a second, but it's just like, to me, do you think that there's any non-terrestrial origin species here currently on Earth?
Well, I know there's a lot of lore about this, the lizard people, the reptilians, the praying mantis, the Zeta Reticulans, the Palladians.
Oh, you're talking my language now.
A long laundry list of alleged visitors. I don't know what's true. I only know, for example, Sergeant Major Bob Dean, who's no longer living. who I met several times and had a lot of personal exchanges with, he reportedly read a document when stationed in Belgium, and it was called The Assessment. It was commissioned by all the superpowers in the Western world, and Dean says he read this assessment, I don't know, he said maybe 100 times. He was a guard in a security facility, and somebody tipped him off. He said, "Hey, you should go in there behind the locked door at one point and look for a document called The Assessment." And he did, and he would read it at night until his shift ended, and then put it back. And in the assessment, apparently there are literally hundreds of different species that have been here in some fashion or another, and the one that got the military brass the most excited and the most troubled was the fact that some of these visitors looked very human-like and could blend right in, which set off all kinds of international security alarms, at least for the people that were engaged or managed this issue.
Well, I have a lot of excitement in me right now because I recently interviewed an empath psychic, a psychic empath, Raven Willow, and she was doing my reading, and she sent me a text. I'm gonna get the reading actually the night that we're recording, you and I, and she just sent me a text, and she goes, there's some other stuff, but she put alien DNA. And I was like, so I asked my wife, I was unsure at the time. I was like, I don't know if that means that I'm part alien or maybe that was something left over from an alien probing. So
good luck.
Well, yeah. So we'll see how that goes. But that's interesting that there are, because I try to wrap my head around the reasoning why they wouldn't, especially if they could make things better, why an extraterrestrial species wouldn't be more upfront about, here we are. Of course, if they ruin their own planet, maybe we don't want to hear from them. Maybe they need to blend it in the background. I don't know. Well,
if they ruin their own planet, chances are they're not going to get here from there. So,
well, that's what I've always said. People ask me, do I think humans will travel through space? And I go, I don't think we'll make it. I don't think we'll advance that long. I think that we'll do something to ruin it for ourselves. Hold on, I got a sound for that too. So here's a question that I wanted to ask, because I try to reconcile things on if I see a conflict and someone brings something up, which my wife is great at being a devil's advocate. And I was watching something, I was probably on the Wi-Files as well, or somewhere on the internet, about inner Earth. There being a species of something in inner Earth. And I had always, up until a few weeks ago, I would have dismissed that as quickly as a flat earther. But then my wife's, she goes, so to you, a species could travel across time and space, but yet there can't be anyone that lives in a big cavern inside of Earth. And I was like, so I leaned, I don't know. I mean, I think at this point, I have now taken on that if someone crawls out of the center of the Earth, lizard person or not, and they're like, hey, this is where we live, I would probably be more accepting of that now.
Well, there's that inner Earth thing goes back to the Admiral Byrd exploration of Antarctica, who claimed there was an opening into inner Earth where there was a whole nother civilization thriving. I mean, there's so many stories in in this arena. I mean, I'm an English major. I mean, I love stories of just about any type, but these stories drive the imagination, and
Do you think
you can
there's still a
find the
lot of
Admiral
false
Byrd
information?
story online, and it's quite a tale to
It is
tell.
quite a tale. I am very familiar with that. Like I say, I spend a lot of time. It's funny. My wife, if she hears the theme to Ancient Aliens, she immediately falls asleep. It's almost like, and I swear, I am saying this right now, I did not hypnotize her to fall asleep when that sound comes on. But I mean, I have to make sure she's seated or laying down. If she's standing, I don't want her to hurt herself by falling. But it was so funny. She was so used to it. They changed the theme song within the last couple years, I think. And she actually noticed. She goes, "This one doesn't make me as tired." And I just always thought that was funny. So
Yeah, if you go down that particular Admiral Byrd rabbit hole, you're also going to probably discover the Nazi connection to UFOs and the occult, and I mean, there's just no end to it. And I joke a couple times in my book that this is my farewell to ufology, just because I'm tired. I don't want to see any more videos of flying objects. I don't want to hear any more experts talk about how they get here from there. I don't want to hear someone's abduction story or their UFO sighting. I've been there, done that. So in some ways, it really is a farewell to ufology. I'm increasingly, even though with all the stuff going on in Washington and Congress right now, in which gives the appearance that we're in a true disclosure era, I'm almost indifferent toward that, even though I continue to follow it. But will I continue to follow it 6 months from now? I don't know. I have other things to do in my life before it's over.
right. So let me ask you this. So this is a very true story. When and I don't know what happened to this little stuffed animal, or not stuffed animal. We had this little stuffed alien. It's probably 4 inches tall, and I used to keep it in my center console because I'd always told my wife, if a UFO lands in front of me, I am getting on that. Like if I can't call you or something, then I'm going to, this will be on the floorboard of my car. And that way if you find my abandoned car in the middle of a road and the aliens, stuffed animals on the floorboard, you know that aliens came and I left. And it was also a good out too. I mean, it was always like a back door. Like if this, and this is 27 years ago, we've been together 27 years now, but it was always like, well, if this marriage thing doesn't work out, I can just throw that and I disappear. But if a UFO lands in front of you, Martin, do you get on that UFO? Are you that, you're driving down that road, no one else is around. I don't know why you're on this particular road where no one else is around. A UFO lands in front of you. You know exactly what it is. It opens up. Whether something does or does not come out, do you approach it? Do you get on it, Martin?
That's a good question. Even 10 years ago, I would probably give you a hard yes. Now I have to give you a hard, I don't know. I mean, I tend to enjoy life on Earth. I'm not sure. At this point in my life, I'm ready to, set up shop in another galaxy far, far away. It's a good question. I mean, a couple months before my book was published, I had another high strangeness event that I don't know if I need to go into other than to say I was picking up Chinese food someplace and out of, and I'm on a road facing downtown Minneapolis. I'm in the left turn lane to go back to our house, and I see an object with portals kind of drop out of the sky between the road I'm on and downtown Minneapolis, which is about maybe 2.5 miles, 3 miles from here. And it goes across the highway, maybe 500 feet above, and I'm looking around. It's dark. I'm looking around to see if people in the lane next to me have noticed this thing, and I can't tell because all of a sudden I get the green light to turn left, and I got to turn left because I got cars behind me. And I go home and I say to my wife, and we have this sort of shared expression, the boys upstairs. I said, I saw the boys upstairs again, and I told her what had happened. And
Right.
she just kind of shrugged. I mean, after the stuff we experienced together in our house, we just kind of take it as a given. You know, it's high strangeness, and until we really know what it's about, we just have to keep living our lives. But here's the kicker on that story. 3 days after this event, I went over to a friend's house in St. Paul. His name is Curtis A. He's in the book. I recall his alleged abduction experience in Wisconsin, which is it's a very convincing story. And Kurt's been into this subject as long as I or anyone else has, and he's always got the latest UFO books on his coffee table, and there happened to be a new one, a picture book of different objects photographed around the world, and I'm looking through it kind of absently, and we're making small talk like, hey, what have you been doing, blah, blah, blah. Kurt's a rock and roll singer. He could have been a star, but he never wanted to travel to promote his career. He's a good songwriter. He's got this really tight abduction story. And I'm looking through this little booklet, and all of a sudden I see a photograph of the same object that I had seen 3 days earlier picking up Chinese food, the exact same object. And I almost slid off the couch and then told Kurt the story. He just nodded his head and, yeah, cool, man. Like, yeah, just more of the same.
And you know, it's interesting. I was talking about how some people won't believe my story. Like my story, mine was a light. It literally, if it would have, because I think it was going too fast. I think that's really what caught everyone's eye. It wasn't like a shooting star. I mean, this fucker, whatever was going on in the sky, it was brighter. It was bright enough that it drew attention, and it was going so fast and then came to a dead stop. And so I was totally relieved, and it was years later, but I finally saw some, and I wish I could go back and find out what show I was watching, because I wish I could to find that one clip to show people what I saw, because it's not overly impressive. Like you said that you saw portals, and I can just imagine. I remember there was an air show that used to be here in the suburbs of Kansas City that was probably 10 miles. Where they used to have the air show was probably 10 miles from their house, but these planes going so fast they can't turn around real quick. And one day and I believe it was an F-18 came, and he banked. I was outside mowing, and he banked, and he was so low I could literally see his helmet and his goggles and everything. But that's not what I didn't see a portal. I saw a light. My wife got to see. When she saw it, it's funny. I will tell the story that I saw a pin light booking through the sky, and it went all this, and then it went the other way. And people will call bullshit on me. They're like, okay, whatever, man. And then Bobby, my wife, she'll be like, well, once I was driving down 135th Street, and this thing that looked like a slow-moving plane flew over my head. And everyone's like, wow, a UFO. And I'm like, it could have been a slow move. I'm still, and I know I will get corrected for this, but I still to this day say it could have just been a slow moving plane.
Yeah, well, it reminds me of a story going back to Prince. Prince's first manager, the guy who discovered him and got him his unprecedented 5 record Warner Brothers contract, in which he was allowed to produce and play all the instruments on those albums. His name is Owen Husney. Owen had a very similar encounter like that about an hour west of here, just driving around in the country with his girlfriend one day. And it interfered with the electronics in his car. It started making the CD. He was, oddly enough, playing a classical music album on his CD player, and it started to scramble the sound on that. And he thought it was a cop using radar. He was waiting to be busted for speeding out in country road somewhere.
Right.
But no, about 20 seconds later, they saw this object very close to the car fly right over them, probably 30 feet across in diameter, the actual disc. Silent, no sounds of propulsion or anything else. And his wife right away goes, "Oh, that's a flying saucer. That's a UFO." And Owen's going, "What?" But there's more to Owen's story, and you can read about it in the Space Pen Club. It's some interesting things about lights coming on in his house months after the fact, which was similar to my wife's and my.
Hold on. So, hold on. What about lights coming on in the house?
He woke up at one point several months after this at 4 a.m, and all the lights had come on in his house. He thought,
hold on. So here's a weird story. We have talked about it. My wife and I do a podcast as well, and we've talked about it on that. We've talked about it on this show. We talked about our first house, how I used to think the house was haunted, and Bobby believed me, and I'm not sure, I can't remember whether it happened with her there or not, but it seemed to happen when she would go out of town with our kids. She would go to visit her parents in Wichita, which is about 3 hours south of Kansas City. And when they would leave, and I always thought it was a haunting because all the lights would be turned on in the entire house. Every single light. And I mean, it happened. And I've talked about this numerous times, but I've always just said, because I didn't have anything, any other baseline. I was like, well, what else would turn? It's not me turning the lights on. And I know our dog, she is not that smart. She's not turning the lights on. So I just kind of pushed it off to that. So you're saying that there was a thing with the lights with you all?
Yeah, the lights came on in Owen's house, and the lights also came on in our house over numerous nights. And one night when I woke up 4 a.m, there was a really disturbing sound associated with it. I mean, I think in the book I call it sounded like cats rutting or something, but it was an odd sound, and I wasn't awake very long for it. But I think I write in the book like Owen's explanation about these lights coming on, and Owen says he felt like they were coming back to check on him once he realized his house wasn't being burglarized and he wasn't having a heart attack or something.
It is so weird because I can't even explain. I don't have a word for the feeling, but I just have this weird feeling right now. Because like I said, because it sounds very similar to what happened to me. And I just went to, oh, well, it must be a haunt. I mean, I don't know why. So that is interesting because I've never heard that in all the different things. But I guess in TV shows, a lot of times they do represent like something's around, the lights tend to go on and off sometimes. But I've never.
Yeah, my assumptions were early on that this must be some kind of poltergeist activity or something. But look, there's a lot of phenomena out there that we don't know or understand or we can't relate to, or vice versa. And to lump it all and to blame it all onto, project it all onto extraterrestrials, I think is a little unfair,
right, on
our part. But I don't know. It's a strange universe we live in.
It is. I've actually done shows and I've given multiple hours of thought about what time would be the best time for an alien invasion. Like, not only like best time of the year, like, because if power is going to go down and you got to hunt and be outside and stuff. I mean, there's a lot of, so I've given so much thought into the best time. I almost have it narrowed down. I think that by the end of this year, I will have an episode where I will be able to say, and the bad thing, it's all dependent on me, because if it's light where I am, it's going to be dark somewhere else is in the world. So I get that. So everything's going to revolve around me like it does in most of my life. So, yeah. So, well, I'm interested now in finding out more about the people that have experienced the light issue. Because like I say, I just always, not that I'm saying that it is something else, but the fact that I never have thought about it, about being anything else than ghost or something. And the weird thing is, you mentioned sound too, is I don't remember a sound, but I do remember lying in bed, because it would happen multiple times, like in the same night. I would turn them all off, and then 2 hours later, every light in the house would be on. Even the ones that you would have to pull, like the little string to get them to come on. Every single light would be on.
That's pretty.
It was really weird, and I just was like, well, it must be ghosts. That has to be what it is. But I do remember on multiple times yelling, "Would you guys just please stop?" And now that I say it, I always said it the same exact way. Will you guys just please stop? Yeah. So maybe I just wasn't. Who knows? Dang it. Maybe I'll find this out in my reading I have later tonight. Maybe I am an alien and they were just coming to visit. I don't know.
Hard to know.
So you say that ufology may not be 6 months for now. You may not know where your relationship is with that. So what is next for Martin Keller? What is next for you?
Well, going back again to our original discussion, I started a memoir about Bob Dylan, and I'm hoping to finish it this winter. Winters can be pretty long and punishing up here in
Yes,
Minnesota.
they can.
Also very conducive to writing projects. So I'm hoping to do that. I have another project that I can't talk about. And then I have a couple.
But you still
novels.
wanted to mention it, didn't you? Another project that I can't talk about. That's good. Put the hook in. Yeah.
I got to tease that out.
Yes, you do.
Fruition. But, I'm going to have to jump here shortly. But there's a lot of good research that went into my book, Space Pen Club. There's a lot of great quotes in it. And one of the ones, and this is kind of where I leave everything in the book. It's also the quote I finished with up in Fargo at Valley Con, my first con experience. It was said by a British geneticist and evolutionary biologist in 1927, so almost 100 years ago, a gentleman named J.B.S. Haldane, who said the universe is not only stranger than we suppose, but it's stranger than we can suppose. I mean, I love that quote.
Yeah, that's
I think
amazing.
It kind of defines where I am mentally and intellectually and emotionally about this subject. And that's my parting shot.
Well, I appreciate it very much. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. For everyone that's listening, once again, this was Martin Keller. Martin Keller's the author of, he has Hijinx and Hearsay, Scenester Stories from Minnesota Pop Life, which sounds just amazing. And then also the Space Pen Club. So available. Amazon, where else can you find that book?
You can find both books on Amazon. You can also find the Hijinx and Hearsay at the Minnesota Historical Society website. I think the cost is the same as it is on Amazon, but it's nice when you go directly to the publisher.
Right.
For books like that. If you do buy the Space Pen Club on Amazon, please write a review of it, good or bad. I love to get reviews. The Amazon algorithm loves content, loves more words, more reviews. You can also, join the Space Pen Club on group page on Facebook, and you can go to the book's website, www.thespacepenclub.com, where I am trying to blog on a semi-regular basis, although I'm about 6 weeks behind right now since my last one. I've been really effing busy. But there's a lot of good information about the book. There's also a couple links to Amazon, and there's some really terrific reviews that people have done about the book. So,
and for everyone
thanks for having me on, fellow stoner.
Yeah, thank you so much for being on. And for everyone that listens and follows the Stone Genius on Instagram, all of Martin's links, we will put all of those on there. I know you can't click the link through Instagram, but I will have all that information for you when this podcast is out. So if you're listening to the podcast before you've gone to Instagram, you can find all this information over at Instagram, which again is at the Stone Genius. So Martin, thank you for so much for being on the podcast. It was a lot of fun talking to you. I learned a lot of information, and now I'm totally going to have to start rethinking the nights that the lights came on in the Martin household.
Yeah, well, I'm always rethinking it, but not too often anymore.
Okay.
Thanks again, man.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast. Everyone else, you've been listening to the Stone Genius podcast. Thanks for listening.